Your goal while watching this video is to figure out how to identify congruent angles and congruent sides. Okay, so congruent again just means exactly the same. So they have the same size, the same shape, they might be rotated differently. So figures that have the same size and the same shape are called congruent. Make sure you get that on your paper too. The triangles below are congruent, and when we talk about things that are congruent or things that are the same, we use the word corresponding. So corresponding angles means the angles that are exactly the same size and between the same sides on two shapes. So here we'd say angle B and angle E are corresponding angles. They're on different shapes, but they're the same size. They match up. If you stack those triangles on top of each other, they would match up with each other. Angle A and angle D are corresponding angles. Angle C and angle F are corresponding angles. And then in the same way, corresponding sides are the sides that, if you put the triangles right on top of each other, would match up. So one set of corresponding sides is AC, right? We could say AC corresponds to DF. Okay, so in this problem, the figures are congruent. Name the corresponding angles and the corresponding sides, right? This is not super complicated. So corresponding angles, angles that match up. They've already told us that the figures are congruent. They're exactly the same. So we could say angle A and angle W correspond. This should be written on your paper as well. Angle B and angle X correspond. So you write angle B and angle X, and from there on out you get the idea. So write down the other two sets of corresponding angles. Corresponding sides is just as simple, although when you write it, there's one more thing you kind of got to look out for. So corresponding sides, I'm sure all of you could look at this and tell me that this side right here corresponds to this side or matches up with that side. So there we would name it, or we call it AB. It's a line segment, so we draw a name or a line above it, all right, AB. And then we want to make sure that if we started with A over here, we start with the same vertex down here. So we could say AB and WX are corresponding. We shouldn't say that AB and XW are corresponding, all right? Another set of corresponding sides, we could say BC and XY are corresponding. Again, you wouldn't want to say BC and YX because we're working in a different direction. Okay, then you have an on your own to do. The figures are congruent. Name the corresponding angles and the corresponding sides. So I just make an angle list over here, side list over here, and then list out, for example, angle K and angle R are corresponding. A side, we could say side JK, how appropriate, and side QR are corresponding, and then complete the list there. So not hard, maybe a little time consuming, but pause the video if you need to and finish that up. Okay, so identifying congruent figures. In this last problem, they told us that the figures are congruent, so we had no questions about that. But sometimes they're going to ask if two shapes are congruent, and your job is to figure it out. So two figures are congruent when corresponding angles and corresponding sides are congruent. So basically it means the angles all have to be the same. So this angle has to be the same as this one, this angle has to be the same as this one, and this angle has to be the same as this one right here. And all sides, corresponding sides, have to be the same. All right, so looking at these triangles, they use these little hash marks, these little lines, to just show that they match up. So one hash mark there and one hash mark here, it's saying that those sides are the same. Two hash marks here and two hash marks here, also saying that those two sides are the same. So since every side matches up with the side on this one, all right, their sides, corresponding sides are congruent, but their angles also have to be. For angles, we use these circles, but the same way. So half circle here matches up with one here. This one has two and this one has two, showing that they match up. You get the idea, right? So since these two triangles have all corresponding sides are congruent and all corresponding angles are congruent, we would say that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. All right, and notice when they named them triangle ABC, they started here, worked their way up, and then came back. So they went like this. All right, so then when we name this triangle, we have to start in the same place and go the same direction. We could have named it triangle CBA and triangle FEB, as long as we're consistent with where we start and where we end up on the vertices. All right. Which square is congruent to square A? So remember, things that are congruent have exact same sides. So corresponding sides are congruent, are the same. So right away we can eliminate square B because its sides are 9 units in length. So looking at these two, their corresponding sides are congruent. Are their angles also congruent? Well, in the square, we know that every angle is a right angle. So each of those is 90 degrees. Each of these is 90 degrees. So those two figures are congruent, and you can put that in note here. So RC is congruent to square A. Okay, last example. So using congruent figures, what are they going to ask us to do when we have two figures that are congruent? Trapezoids, remember trapezoids have exactly one set of parallel lines. Parallelograms have two, so these are trapezoids. Trapezoids A, B, C, T, and J, K, L, M are congruent. So when they say they are congruent, we know that corresponding sides are the same, are congruent, and corresponding angles are the same, are congruent. So what is the length of side JM? Well, if this shape is congruent to this shape, which we know it is, then JM has to be the same as AD. What is the perimeter of JKLM? There are a few ways we could do this. We could transfer all our labels from ABCD to JKLM and say, oh, this is 10 feet, this is 8 feet, this is 6 feet, and this is 8 feet. Or we could have just added them up on this one and said, okay, we know the perimeter will be exactly the same because all the side lengths are the same. So you do your adding here, got your 16, your 26, with another 6 feet will give us 32 feet. When you're done watching this video, raise your hand. Got your notes complete, and then you'll be able to move on.